O G C O C G. All right. All right. Recording has started. Without further ado, on the motion, this House supports the stigmatization of public displays of extreme emotion. I now call upon the Prime Minister. Here.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, give me a moment to set up my timer. Okay, I'll be starting my speech in three, two, one. Now, I know what opposition is going to say. Opposition is going to say that, our side is literally supporting 1984, right? That you are not going to be able to, express emotions, express these emotions, and it will be worse for society, worse for individuals, and it is and it is principally unjustified. However, in my speech, I'm going to show you as to why it is both in terms of utility and in terms of principle, why this is sort of justified to stigmatize these public displays of extreme emotion. Now, is the problem of today's debate is simple. It is simply put, extreme, like when you sort of have extreme showcases of emotion, we see that it will be worse both principally and in terms of utility for society, for individuals, and that we have this sort of obligation to both individuals and society to suppress these emotions. So what then is our side? What is society going to be looking like on our side? We say that on our side, society is going to have individuals that sure may be sort of forced to boil up this anxiety, this sadness that they have. However, we see that A, there is not necessarily a lot of harm, and B, the comparative, if they don't boil up this anxiety or sadness, is that a lot of harm is going to be placed on individuals, and that it is, again, principally unjustified. Okay, so then on to my first substantive, which is as to why there is this sort of obligation to individuals for the individual who has extreme emotion in society to sort of not display it so overtly. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example, right? I'm going to give you the example of public indecency, right? So the principle behind public indecency is used to justify, the principle behind public indecency is that each individual has the responsibility to the state insofar as you are benefiting under the welfare of the state, insofar as you are living with other people in the state. Each individual then has the responsibility to the state to not make other people living in the society feel uncomfortable. And so, therefore, we see that in the case of public indecency, the state does have the right to punish you for making other people feel uncomfortable. In the case of extreme emotion, however, we see that it is still justified to have a societal punishment because you do make other people feel uncomfortable. You do worsen the mental state of other individuals, right? However, we see that it is not to the same extent as public indecency. So we see that this societal punishment is less than public indecency, i.e., you just get stigmatized by society. So then on to why this sort of display of emotion will unsettle society, will unsettle these individuals or society at large. Understand that life in society as a whole is really, really mundane, right? You sort of strive for this constant state of contentment, and you don't necessarily want to deal with the issues of other people at large, right? So understand that this sort of mindset may be somewhat selfish. However, it is true, right? And so therefore, when you sort of have these constant outbursts of extreme emotion present within members of society, what happens is that the mental health of the other individuals in society is affected to a large extent. For instance, if let's say I start bawling out of nowhere, right? So it makes the lives of other individuals worse, right? Because then they tend to feel sad. This is the term called emotional contagion, i.e., when I feel sad and I express it, other people then therefore tend to feel sad as well. Right. So understand that there are a couple of reasons as to why this is unjustified. A, other members of society are completely independent or uninvolved from your problem, right? So they don't deserve to have this outcome of feeling sadder because of something that they never took part in, right? And we want to defend these other members of society, right? Number two, we see that suffering as a whole is constant. So if you have this bouncing back and forth of extreme displays of public emotion, then the mental health of these individuals are going to be harmed. But third of all, we see that the marginal emotional distress, i.e., you bottling up your emotions till you go home to cry, for instance, it isn't necessarily worth the trade-off of a large amount of emotional distress for other people, we see that there is a disproportionate amount of suffering, right? I.e., if one individual just starts crying on the street, right, he's gonna affect like 10, 15, 20 people at least. And we see that therefore the outcome isn't necessarily like we see that trading off some amount of marginal emotional distress is worth the fact that we protect these 20 to 25 people, maybe even more. But before I go on to that, PY,
What does stigmatization look like under your side? What kind of narratives are you telling people? Because people don't express extreme emotion in public willy-nilly. There's valid reasons. Could it be your grief, your anxiety?
okay, so understand that like stigmatization may come in the form of like other people like looking at you with a bit of discontentment, with like, like they look at you and go, oh, this guy is crying, this guy is pitiful, this guy is sad, right? But and so like therefore we see that like this stigmatization doesn't necessarily produce a whole lot of real harm to individuals on like to individuals that have these sort of like extreme outbursts of emotion, right? So then back onto my sub, right? So we see that like it is actually better. There are benefits like to this sort of stigmatization, right? Because when you sort of suppress your emotions, when you sort of like when you sort of like don't just straight up cry in the train, we see that you're better able to internally analyze why you're feeling sad, why you're feeling angry, right? However, we see that like just because you boil up or like you suppress your emotions doesn't necessarily mean that you can't express your emotions, you can't express your issues. It's just that you only can express them in sort of a informal setting, in sort of like, let's say, an environment with you and your friends, you and your family, like at home, for instance. We see that you are still able to then express your emotions. And we also don't think that insofar as you want to express yourself to like such an extreme or such a dramatic extent, that we should allow you to do this, right? Understand that we have already explained why there is no real harm, because you just have this marginal level of emotional distress, right? And even if there is somewhat of a harm, we see that it's principally justified because you owe an obligation to society. You owe an obligation to individuals to not worsen the mental state of other people insofar as they're living in their society, you're benefiting their welfare, etc. Right? Initially, sure, it may be a bit worse in terms of mental health of these individuals that like have these displays of extreme emotion. However, when this sort of stigmatization is normalized, it makes it so that it is significantly less harmful to both the emotional and mental and physical health for both the individual that has extreme emotions and for other members of society which are completely independent, completely unrelated to the issues that this individual is facing. And as such, due to the fact that we owe an obligation to individuals, we say side to side proposition. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech and now invite the leader of opposition. Here.
Okay, can you see and hear me?
Yep, you're visible and audible.
Okay, thanks. Also, I'll just clarify. I'm not sure if it was maybe clear before. So I consent to recording. My partner at the deal doesn't. Just so you're aware. Okay. In South Korea, where the societal stigmatization of your expression of emotion is at almost a peak level, where conformity with other types of norms is far larger compared to other areas around the world, that is where you see the highest rates of things like young adult suicide, where young people do not feel like they're able to speak out or express the certain types of experiences that are confining them to a life that they don't feel is worth living. We say that the expression of emotion only comes about in scenarios where people view it as an absolute necessity of themselves, but not only of themselves, but also of their identity in the first place. And that is why limiting it, and that is why stigmatizing it carries about such broad harms in this round. So a few things in the speech. First, I'm going to go about very specific framing as to what we are very specifically talking about in this round in terms of when this expression happens. I'll do some engagement with OO, and then two forms of constructive from OG, then two forms of constructive from OO. First, then framing. Note that there are large mental barriers individuals have to not express extreme emotions when it is not necessary in the status quo, independent of any stigmatization that might exist. Firstly, because there is a perceived level of vulnerability that individuals have to go through to be willing to express this emotion in the first place. That you are showing a part of yourself that you do not usually show to the public. This is a part of yourself in lots of cases you might not even communicate to your friends or to your family on a daily basis, but that it is so boiled up within you that you want to express it to the public in the first place. So this vulnerability takes a large amount to be able to overcome. But secondly, there's a fear of the response to your expression of emotion that is going to exist in the first place. Maybe someone who doesn't understand you. Maybe certain people have different responses to you where you don't maybe accrue enough empathy that you were looking for in the first place. So there's a certain level of a fear response that might mean that you do not want to express this emotion in the first place. But thirdly, just on a very broad level, people don't communicate with emotions in the vast majority of circumstances anyways. When I have conversations with my friend, emotion might be a small part of it, but extreme emotion is almost never a form of my expression. Therefore, being willing to express that emotion in a public place, and this is very critical, is when I feel like there is an absolute need for that expression to happen in the first place, where we say that this is about the autonomy of individuals to actually be able to express themselves, where individuals feel the absolute need to express these emotions in public places. So with that out of the way, I'll do a few things in terms of refutation before argumentation. Firstly, on this very strange claim we get from opening government that public indecency is banned and self-expression, therefore, in terms of extreme emotion, can be limited to a very similar extent because of the way you make other people uncomfortable. But I think that these are just very broadly different levels of physical uncomfortability. That obviously, someone expressing grief or anxiety and crying in public is very different from someone just walking around naked in public. That's not a principle. That's not a principal connection that you're able to draw. But furthermore, we say that emotions are expressions of identity. That, for example, maybe my religion might make someone else feel uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that our religion is restricted in any way. That oftentimes, because your expression is connected to our identity, that is why it cannot be censored in the first place. That is a competing principle. I think is actually far stronger than what OG was actually able to provide to you. But then they say that's actually very marginally emotional distress people go through, and the larger harms and how uncomfortable you make other people feel. We would say that very marginal harms are actually very, very acute. These are harms that make people go to the end of not being want to continue their lives into the first place. Where we say that, sure, maybe some people might feel broadly uncomfortable. Maybe some people actually want to do things that provide you with empathy. This actually provides them with a sense of fulfillment, with them a sense of connection. So I don't think that the weighing up of harms on individual for society actually does anything for OG in this round. On to argumentation then. First argument on the individual. As per framing, this expression is only when it is absolutely necessary, individuals feel like it is absolutely necessary in the first place. Where in many cases, these individuals are actually able to access routes of help and support. Because unfortunately for many people, their families or their existing connections are just people who are not emotionally able to provide for them in the status quo. Maybe I'm someone who's a mother who doesn't have another adult in my home who's able to actually provide me with a sense of support, to provide me with a sense of provide me with a sense of comfort. And this is why in these circumstances, if I need help or support, reaching out to the general public, to communities that are connected to me, is the only way that individuals are able to experience a sense of comfort in the first place. But secondly, I think it is very critical that we can have emotional representations of physical and psychological pain. The very simple intuition pump for this is when someone punches me in the face, to express that happening, I don't go around and punch other people in the face. I instead communicate oftentimes through extreme emotion as to the type of pain that I experienced, because pain cannot be simply communicated on the same level that was delivered. Pain has to be communicated on multiple other levels. And that is when, especially in instances where pain is acute in many scenarios, it is only through extreme emotion that we are able to actually accurately communicate that pain to other people around us. That is when you see someone yelling through a loudspeaker or a microphone, that you naturally have a tendency to want to pay attention to them because you see that they're expressing a certain level of pain that you are not able to experience a communication of that pain through other ways or other metrics. But finally, I think it's just important in terms of injustice, that when people do things like fight for rights or fight for certain injustices they're experiencing in their life, extreme emotion is often the only way for them to be able to do that. So why then does emotional suppression actually lead to very direct harms to the individual? One, because you just don't feel like you were able to live a fundamentally authentic life, that extreme emotions are part of your authenticity. Sure, I don't have to be yelling all the time, but in many instances or in different periods of life where I feel like that is part of myself, that is when I have to live an inauthentic life because of the stigmatization in OG's world. But secondly, there's just less fulfillment. When I have less ability to reach out to support networks, that is when I cannot become as fulfilled as an individual. And thirdly, we just think that people generally have less empathy. When words oftentimes are not able to communicate enough, that's when people aren't actually able to reach out and support other people around them. Before I go on, I'll take a POI.
Yeah, your argument brought to the logical extreme just suggests that there shouldn't be social etiquette in general.
No, we already gave you very critical reasons why the expression of this motion, because maybe things like social etiquette, because of just expression of vulnerability, there were three reasons I gave you from the top of my speech, probably isn't going to likely happen on a very daily basis. Maybe this is only a form of expression I have to do like once in my lifetime, but still it is important when that expression, I do feel a need to express it to public. It is very, very important that I'm allowed to without the stigmatization that society or other impose upon me. But secondly, I think it's actually very important for us to be able to criticize bad forms of expression. The when extreme emotions that are negative are not communicated in societal spaces and in public places, that is when they're able to fester. When someone is yelling harmful beliefs, it is critically important that it happens and gains attention in public places for us to be able to criticize and explain why those beliefs are wrong in the first place. But also, I think here, there's just probably going to be lots of expression and communication and words put out into the public in general. Lots of people speak, lots of people have different opinions. We have to be able to weigh up which opinions we deem necessary to, for example, solve problems or to devote government policy towards those forms of opinions. So when, for example, lots of people express extreme emotions, the public is able to narrow in what is most necessary for us to be able to address as a human population in the first place. But finally, I think this is actually pretty important. Many people with certain types, we think that people have uniqueness of certain types of emotions, where oftentimes you can simply go home to escape the public, whereas we think that in private, that is when individuals, when they cannot reach that certain level of empathy, it is critically important that it happens in public spaces. So for all these reasons, not only for the individual, also for society as a whole, I'm very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here you go.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want you to imagine a world in which you go out onto the street, you want to take a nice walk in the park, for example, and for some reason, you have to see 7 different people constantly bawling their eyes out because of the fact that they are slightly unhappy with their lives. I want you to imagine how depressing and how sad your society would be. I want you to imagine how it would feel like to live in a world where everybody can only communicate through the expression of extreme emotion, and how exactly this will realistically look like for a person on the ground. We tell you very, very simply put that social etiquette is what holds the fabric of society. And insofar as extreme emotion is something which is not going to lead to good practical outcomes for the larger society as a whole, we are both principally and practically justified in stigmatizing it. I'm going to be dealing with a few things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to be rebutting the entirety of opening ops case. So what do they tell us? The fundamental claim that underlies the basis of all of their claims is this idea that essentially extreme emotion will only be expressed when there's a high threshold. That is to say that people won't constantly express themselves with extreme emotion, right, in the current status quo, because you only express yourself in such an extreme manner in situations in which you're going to be, for example, in severe emotional distress. I want to directly dispute this premise. I tell you very, very simply put, and we tell you on OG, that this is not actually the case. The reason why the threshold is so high in the first place is precisely because there's stigmatization. It's precisely because it's not seen as a normal thing. Thereby, then you need to justify it emotionally by having an extreme reaction. So the threshold there is high because of the stigmatization. By getting rid of it, you significantly lower that threshold. So you're probably going to get significantly more extreme emotion on their side of the house. But know that this also completely just ignores my first speaker's entire analysis regarding why exactly we basically train people to better internalize the emotions on our side of the house. Insofar as we tell people that yes, it's not necessarily okay and socially acceptable for you to fully express yourselves on the street, for example, in public, for example, we tell them then that we train them to better deal with their emotions, right? And know that this also takes down their harm about how exactly people will have to be forced to bottle it up. Because insofar as you are taught from youth that it's not okay to do these sorts of things in public, we tell you that we train them from youth, and we teach them from youth, and we teach society as a whole and people from youth that they should be able to, or rather how they should be able to do these sorts of things, and how exactly they should be able to express these emotions or keep their emotions to themselves. So insofar as internalization of emotions is concerned, we tell you we teach people to internalize the emotion, which largely mitigates their point about how exactly this is going to be so extremely stressful for individuals to go through. Okay, so what else do they tell us? They tell us that there is a need for you to publicly express yourself because of the fact that there's no other alternative for some people. I want to again dispute this premise. We argue that there are a lot of private spaces that exist in real life because of the things like, the increasing importance of mental health that we are seeing in the current status quo. There are more and more private institutions, private bodies that give these people the space that they need to express their emotions. Thereby, then we tell you that this argument completely false, right? But the second thing is that if you want to talk about it as, I need to talk to my friends about it, I need to talk about it to other trusted people, we tell you that you can also do that just in a private space. We simply don't understand why it's necessary for you to throw a tantrum in public in order to get the emotional support you need. It's unlikely that the public will even provide you with that emotional support in the first place. But then we get to this point about how it limits your ability to be authentic. And I think this basically sums up my entire problem with opposition's case. Insofar as they want to claim that the principle for why exactly you should be allowed to express yourself in an extreme manner in public is that it is somehow a way for you to exercise your authenticity, we tell you that this argument, again, taken to the logical extreme, necessarily means that there's not going to be any form of social etiquette in their world. Because insofar as you tell people that what you're experiencing should immediately be expressed because of the fact that you are the most important person and because of the fact that you should be expressing yourself, even if it means that other people are going to be feeling uncomfortable because of it, we tell you thereby then you give them the message that you are legitimately or rather you give them the message that they themselves should not follow any form of social etiquette. This argument completely false. Okay, so let me revive and continue to extend upon what my first speaker has said. We've explained to you multiple things. First thing, we've explained to you how exactly our world legitimately looks like. When we tell people that it's generally not socially acceptable for you to express yourself in extreme ways outside, what we essentially get is we get people who are going to express themselves in a far more calm manner. Note that this also flips the entire argument on discourse. When you express yourself in an extreme way, when you're in complete anger or jubilation or anxiety or you're breaking down and in tears, we tell you that very, very simply put, this actually limits your ability to have productive discourse. Because when your emotions take over your ability to legitimately have discourse, you aren't able to logically talk about them. So when it comes to practical, how you're going to be able to deal with your emotions, we tell you we do it better when we stigmatize these sorts of things. But secondly, why are we principally justifying stigmatization? Note that we've given you a lot of analysis regarding this. Before I continue, I will take your POI.
So it is actually very important for us to be able to distinguish, as I told you in LO, different types of discourse, because different types of discourse have different types of importance for us to be able to prioritize in general public places. When on your side, everyone is equal and therefore nothing actually gets done.
Well, I think that that's just completely illogical, right? Like different types of discourse can exist without you necessarily having to express yourself in an extreme way. I could use, for example, slightly harsher words to express certain things. We don't exactly understand why exactly this discourse is so necessary. Even if we were to give you this point, you still lose, right? So, okay, back to my point about the analysis regarding why exactly we're principally justified and my extension as to why you owe society an obligation. No, my first speaker has already given you a large amount of characterization and analysis as to why exactly you owe an obligation to other individuals. But we argue that this obligation in fact extends to society as a whole, because insofar as laws like public indecency laws legitimately exist to prevent, because of the fact that you inherently owe an obligation to the state, because you owe an obligation to the state, because you live under the state, you consume the welfare that the state provides you with, you thereby have an obligation to ensure that the society at large is not going to be majorly disrupted by your outbursts. You thereby then have a societal obligation to follow social etiquette and not make everyone else feel uncomfortable. Therefore, we tell you that very, very simply put, you also have an obligation to the larger society as a whole to not express the emotions in such an extreme manner. So we tell you, therefore, that we have principle justification to explain why exactly the stigmatization is justified. And we also explain to you why exactly stigmatization necessarily leads to people who deal with their emotions in a far more rational, far calmer manner. So for that reason, we tell you that very, very simply put, emotions are dealt with better on our side of the house. We tell you for that very, very simple reason, we've never been prouder to propose. Thank you, Sai Oji.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Yaya, to start off the closing debate. Yaya.
Hi, can I check I'm audible and visible?
Yep, both.
All right, is this volume okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, I'll take my POI as well, please. Thank you. Three things I'm going to do in today's speech. I'm going to first attack OO's frame and prove why they're exclusive and their benefits aren't exclusive to their side. Second thing I'm going to do is reframe OG's case to make their impact actually manifest. And then the third, I'm going to provide a horizontal extension on why we get better support systems on our side of the house. My rebuttals are going to be integrated into my speech. I'll spec them out for you. So first thing I'm going to do is expand on OG's principles. The first thing you talk about is the principle of respect. So you mentioned this, but they don't actually explain why people necessarily feel that uncomfortable and don't explain the tangible effects that you get when people see others crying on the street and why that is necessarily so bad. So we're going to prove that to you here. I think the essential frame here is that people inherently feel sympathy and a desire to help others. And this becomes problematic at the point in which you don't have this stigmatization of public displays of emotion. It becomes problematic when you have to apply this sympathy to strangers, because we think that inherently, when you see people crying on the street, you feel a moral obligation to stop and help them. We think it's extremely problematic at the point at which people feel the need to extend this level of like emotional regulation to others, and they probably burn out because they have to extend it so many times in a day. We don't think like this is an impact that like we can accept in because of the impact that it has on others. We don't think OG manages to explain as well because their only parallel is like public indecency, but we think we provide a key framing here that like why people feeling the sympathy and the desire to help others means that they are necessarily very affected at the point at which public displays of emotions exist. The second thing we're going to prove here then is why people learning to regulate their emotions is a good thing, right? And here's where we're going to explain how the stigmatization works, because we don't think OG does this. I think this stigma places this ability to emotionally regulate yourself as a necessary process of growing up. So this looks like it being socially acceptable when a toddler can cry, but it being kind of weird when like an adult person does it. And I think what this means is that as people grow up and as they realize that this stigma exists, they internalize the necessity of learning how to hide their emotions. And this becomes habitual for them because it feels unnatural to do these things in public. And here's where we're going to engage on like OO's mechanism that like people don't actually feel comfortable expressing their emotions, and this like makes it worse. We think the mechanism here, right, is that people, it's not necessarily true that people are unable to express their emotions with this stigma. We think that people have an inherent desire to express their emotions to those close to them. We think this still exists on outside of the house.
POI.
So we don't think that there are claims of like authenticity and why this doesn't exist on outside stands. But what we think happens on our side is that people learn that expressing and projecting emotions in public is like bad or unacceptable. So overseas, this doesn't matter, right? Because people have the autonomy to leave public spaces. Note that we don't think autonomy exists at the point in which you can't exist comfortably in public spaces. You can't go to parks without seeing people cry. We don't think it's actually true that, oh, people have the autonomy to just leave public spaces. We don't see why this is like an argument on that side of the house. But then on why regulating like your emotions is that important, because like note that OG doesn't actually impact this, so we're going to do this for you. We think that this is so important because it's an acknowledgement of the principle that you're responsible for your own emotions and it's not other people's job to help you deal with this, right? Two mechanisms for this. We think the first is that accepting the principle that happens on their side when it's okay for you to like project and express your emotions in public means that you're okay with inflicting outward expressions of your like anger or your sadness onto others. The extension of this means that you probably are also more likely to feel comfortable with things like punching people because you accept the principle that it's okay to inflict your emotions on others. We don't think this exists on outside of the house when you just accept that your emotions are your own things to deal with, they're not to be inflicted on other people. Second mechanism here, we think at point at which we force people to learn regulating mechanisms, to learn how to manage their emotions, it's good at a point in which people can dampen and cope with their emotions. And this is not a mechanism that exists on opposition side of the house, right? We think that the desire to hide the emotions that comes from this stigma means that you learn to control the physical responses to your emotions because you don't want to break down crying in public. This probably means that you make yourself do things like take deep breaths to calm yourself down. This is a mechanism exclusive to the outside. People don't learn this on their side of the house because they're perfectly okay with crying in public. They don't learn mechanisms that help them to deal with this. And why is this so important, right? We think that a lot of emotions are just tied to physical signs. So as soon as you learn to manage the physical signs of the emotions, it probably means that you are able to dampen the damaging effects of these emotions on you. And the alternative on the other side is that you just let your emotions control you. You don't learn any form of regulating mechanisms to these emotions because you are never in a situation where you feel the need to regulate this. Before I move on, I'll take your POI.
You say people have an innate desire to express extreme emotions. We agree, but the characterization that is most probable is someone like a colleague or friend sobbing at work because of the death of a loved one. Why is it so much of a burden for you to have empathy and check up on them in public in that situation?
Look, I think if this person is your coworker or your friend, yeah, you're probably going to check in on them because you have a personal relationship with them. We don't think that's like what the differential that exists on outside of the house here, right? I think the differential is that you are expressing these things to complete strangers who have no personal connection to you. I think that's the actual delta that happens in this debate. If you aren't able to like recognize this, then we think you just lose. But moving on quickly then to my horizontal extension on why we get better support systems on outside of the house. And here's where we respond to OO's point of like how they get better how they enable people to express emotions better and therefore get things like institutional support. We think this exists on outside of the house as well, and it's in fact even better. So firstly, the response to them is that we think it's not true that people are unable to get support like on outside of the house when this stigmatization exists. We think people have an inherent desire to talk things over with others. I think the actual difference on outside that exists is that you do these things with people who are close to you and you get support from them. So why is this necessarily so much better? We think that when people communicate these things to their inner circle, they get more value when they do discuss it, as opposed to a world where you just display it to every single person whether or not they have a personal connection to you. Two reasons for this. We think firstly, when this stigmatization exists and emotions become something that you can only express with your inner circle, when you do express these emotions, it is an indication to people that they are in your in group. Because this stigma exists, people know that you don't randomly express these things. So when you are vulnerable with them and you do confide your emotions, this is seen as a sign of trust and seen as you're confiding in them because they're somewhat important to you. We think this means that they're naturally far more inclined to help you and actually give you like the level of support that you need. Because fundamentally, we think it's pretty draining to like emotionally support someone. There needs to be a strong level of personal connection involved. We think this only happens on our side when people view this like confidence of their emotions as like something exclusive to them, as an indication of how like strong their relationship is. The second point here is that we think we get better and more nuanced perspectives. We think people can only help and support you at the point at which you know your person, they know your personality, they know that how to tailor their advice to you. We think this doesn't exist on all sides of the house where like literally the only delta is that you express these things to strangers. We don't think they get any like form of exclusive support on their side of the house because fundamentally we don't think strangers are able to support your emotional needs. So I think the impacts on outside of the house when your expressions of your emotions is restricted to people who can know you. This means that you probably get a far higher quality of actual help on your side at the point at which you indicate to them that this is something special that you are doing with them. It's a sign of your personal connection. People are just far more inclined to put in the emotional work to help and support you. But the second mechanism here is that we think it just brings people closer together. It becomes a mechanism for how people strengthen relationships when this expression of emotions becomes an exclusive connection that you have with your close friends and families. And because this doesn't exist on OO side of the house, we think we take this debate. Never been prouder to propose.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I invite the member of UP here.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. There's a blackout in my home right now because Ryan Radio sponsors won't give me electricity for some reason right now. So if I'm disconnected, yeah, I hope that doesn't happen. All right. Give me a minute. Okay. All right. Hello, my name is Faris. Pronouns go by he, him. POIs in the chat. And I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the biggest issue in this debate throughout all these 5 speeches so far is that none of the teams have decided on what's the most important stakeholder for this debate today. So on to some framing first, right? I think that most people don't just cry out in public, right? And it only happens usually because of 2 reasons. One, because there's specific events that happened in their life, just as OO has rightfully pointed out. But B, I think another important part that no one has talked about is how some people are just mentally unstable. And by stigmatizing these type of people, by giving out their emotions in public, is a fundamental assault on this person's human rights. So before I go on deeper into this principal argument, let's deal with some things given by CG, right? So CG tells us that there isn't that there's a harm in everyone else, the public, when they see some person crying out loud on the side of the street. So 2 responses here. One is that I think that on-site government, most of their impacts are heavily exaggerated, that everyone else is going to start crying. I think it's the opposite of that. No, at first I think that most people would just be mildly annoyed by that, right? Because like if you don't like to see that, then it's so annoying. Okay, and then you just move on. 10 minutes later, you already forgot about it. Second of all, right, if you're actually a sad person, I think when a sad person sees a sad person, they don't both feel like crying. Most of the time, they feel like, oh, there's someone else that's actually really in the dumps right now. It's okay for me to be sad. And if he or she wants to join that crying session, then up to him. It's in human nature for these people to act a certain way in a certain point of life, or if that's how they are, then I don't think we should take this away from them. Basically, in government's world, when you stigmatize people, it means that you're being very judgmental upon them, which inflicts a certain amount of emotional damage onto these people, and this is where the harm comes from. And so moving on to what is CO's contribution to this debate. We say that we're going to come up with two things. One, we're going to tell you why is it that we win this on a principle level, and second of all is some vertical extensions on how it leads to better actualization in terms of mechanism. But before that, I'll take a POI from opening.
Yeah, so can you explain how exactly living in a constantly depressing atmosphere where like 50 different people around you are just telling you that they want
I
to
told
kill
you not
themselves?
50 people are going to cry at the street. Like, not everyone's grandma is going to die every single day, bro. You're over-exaggerating this situation, and we can't have this debate if this is the context that you're going for. Okay, now, on to the principal argument. People don't choose to be born with certain amount of emotions. Some people find it that their emotions are a lot bigger than some others that are emotionally apathetic. And this should be something that's totally fine, because it's not something that they choose, it's something that they are born with. So what essentially supporting the stigmatization leads to is it prevents these people from actually stepping foot outside, actually stepping foot into the real world, stepping their foot into meeting new types of people that they could actually sympathize with, right? So when we stop this stigmatization, these people can actually start to approach other people for help. These people can actually start to make new friends. And as we know, making new friends is a form of like being able to express your emotions better, as said by government also. So we just finally to note here that this mental assault on people is just as bad as a physical assault. If 20 people across the street are going to look at you with very judgmental eyes, this probably leads is the same degree as 20 people jabbing you at the street, because they feel bad, and it's an assault onto themselves, right? So on principle, CO already wins by the fact that we protect the most vulnerable type of people. So on to like how everybody else, right, leads to better actualization of what happens. So note that in status quo, right, because of this stigmatization and how emotions are very subjective from person to person, this means that even if you cry a little, certain people will be very judgmental of you. And it doesn't matter if that's actually true, right? Because if this idea, if this narrative is present, you'll be afraid that there might actually be someone, even if there actually isn't, right? You will still be afraid that there's someone that will be judgmental of you. And this is the constant fear that's playing in your heads. Especially when you're already in a very emotional state, especially when you're already very vulnerable, there's something else that's poking on you saying, no, you shouldn't do that. So, because actions are a byproduct of your emotions, if you're going to cry out loud because you're very sad, then this is how you actualize those emotions. This leads to because suppressing sadness is bottling it up, and even if you're suppressing your happiness, it makes you feel like you're silenced, that you can't be happy about whatever that you've been doing. And this also leads to a form of sadness, in the sense that why can't I be happy, right? So the impact of this is simple. We basically avoid people bottling it up, right? Because we say that when you actually release your emotions in public, because most people need this emotion to be seen by others for them to actually feel validated, right? Is the reason why most people would approach these type of people if, for example, they're being sad, right? Most people approach these type of people. So most depressed people because most people, depressed people just need a person to talk to. That's why they go into public in the first place, because this might be where they find it comfortable to release their emotions, and they just need to find anyone. It doesn't really matter usually these people don't even have a support system in the first place. So that's the problem with government's claim on having better support systems. The reason why they have to do it in public is because they have no private place to do it in the first place, right? So on to the weighing, right? We think that CO outweighs every other speech in this debate by helping those that are the most vulnerable, by helping the people that are subjected to how they have been born into their life. So even if it means that some people will become annoyed as a result of this, we think that protecting these sad people is better, because at most these annoyed people can just get over it really soon. But the worst that could happen on our side is these people unaliving themselves. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I invite the Gov Whip here.
Give me a moment to just arrange my notes. Sorry. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I do anything in this I just want to really make clear what exactly side opposition lacks. They, throughout this whole debate, have been hinging on this definition of stigmatization being something different from current society. Well, root shot, stigmatization towards extreme emotions already exists in society. And that's exactly why all these impacts that we've been telling you about, now without stigmatization, I can still regulate my own emotions. I'm still not going to be extreme. I'm still not going to project myself like insanely. All these things fall because of that. And I'll elaborate more about that later on in my substantive speech. But firstly, why is it that our side of the house, CG, has provided you the best actual impact in this case on better social support systems? So both sides agree that people are generally going to be empathetic and people are going to care when people are in public breakdown and likely go up to help you. What OO and CO tell you is that you have no other choice but to turn towards people in public in order to regulate your emotions. And that's the only way that this can ever come to be. I think this is wrong for a few substantive reasons. In a world without stigmatization, we think that it's very likely that for people to feel like, even if I cry in public, people aren't going to judge me that badly. So even if you do feel some sort of like internal checks and balances where you feel I'm going to be shamed, I think that's to a much lesser degree on their side, which is why on their side of the house, there's going to be much more people displaying these extreme emotions of crime, of punching people in anger, things like these. It's also important to consider the fact that this definition of extreme emotions is important here. The other side of the house has tried to characterize justified emotional responses. For example, your tone raising slightly should someone insult you personally as something as an extreme emotion. No, we think the word extreme generally has this connotation of degree, where there needs to be some sort of like physical, like very reactive, explosive reaction. And we think this is something that's important to keep in mind. We think that we provide better support systems on our side of the house because when people keep their emotions to themselves, they're more likely going to turn towards their friends or to their other support systems. People like their friends and family who have known them for years. And because they've known them for years and know their specific interests and probably the specific context that made them upset in the first place, they're better suited and better placed to give advice to these people. Versus on their side of the house, where they're turning to random people in public, which even if they have no other choice but to turn to people in public, this comfort is likely not to be anything good because one, it's not specialized. They're probably going to be giving you very broad-based advice maybe taken from their own lives, which may be completely separate from you. Like imagine you're an office worker ranting about your horrible white-collar job to someone who's been a blue-collar immigrant who's been working their asses off all day and they just see you as living a cushy lifestyle. The comfort they provide at the very best is going to be superficial and surface level. Secondly, no thank you. Even if this is like the advice is somehow specialized, we don't think that people are necessarily going to be acting with good intentions in mind. If I see someone on the streets crying, even if I know I'm not supposed to stigmatize them, I'm probably not going to immediately like incline towards them the same way I would be biased towards a friend, a family member, a co-worker, or a celebrity whose knowledge and sympathetic story I've already been aware of previously. In fact, I may even be a crying, let's say I'm a crying girl in the corner of the street and someone sees that I'm crying, they immediately know that I'm emotionally vulnerable and they may use this opportunity to kind of induct me into something else. For example, in an extreme case, that's actually a lot of how a lot of cults happen. But on a smaller, more likely case, maybe like a silly guy is going to come up to me and ask me like, oh, hey, why don't I bring you some emotional comfort? And it's going to put me in a damaging relationship or damaging circumstance later on. And it's for this reason why actually a better support systems on our sides is so critical. And in fact, this is actually an exclusive benefit because on our side of the house, there's no other person to turn to, and your more likely instinct is to turn towards your friends and family. This builds a sense of connection because, like, when someone
Why?
trusts you with vulnerable information, no, thank you, you're probably going to see that as like, oh wow, this is something that they wouldn't really nearly give to everyone else. Versus on their side of the house, this sort of the support system may not even exist in the first place or be able to exist as intimately because then they know you could just as easily express these sorts of extreme emotions to everyone else. That's the key piece of analysis that we're telling you today. Okay, next, how exactly do we win and overtake OG by outframing them and actually providing you some substantive mechanisms and impacting on why actually the principle of respect works and why the emotional regulation works? Firstly, on this idea of the principle of respect. So let me just quickly go into what CO did. So CO is again said that people are going to feel embarrassed and they're going to respect people necessarily. Firstly, I think like not true again because of what I talked about how it's not counted as stigma. But secondly, I feel as if they've neglected to actually respond directly and engage with our case on why exactly it's important to feel a sort of empathy for others and acknowledge their discomfort. One, I'm just going to quickly revive the whole mechanism that Ashley provided you on how, like, even when there's stigma, people are going to be like, probably going to like the impact of this. Firstly, they are going to be able to better cope with their emotions and their negative emotions on our side of the house. Okay, so how is this so? So only tells you that there's like no better way to emotionally regulate without actually telling you like why. But the V told you is actually like the map here because of the fact that people don't want to view as embarrassing or inconsiderate as others because they know that they're more likely going to be judged. And because of that, that intensifies the nature of their emotional regulation and their incentives to emotionally regulate, which is important to its success.
Why?
Of this is no thank you that people are more likely going to be able to cope with their emotions. Firstly, like negative emotions, like physical responses, like punching people. We think these things can be extremely damaging, and being a victim to the emotional response of a stranger could be something that really unsettles me as a public member because you have no prior history or account of this person existing, and suddenly they are latching onto you. It's very jolting, it's very shocking, and can have huge emotional repercussions, especially because of the extreme nature of emotions. Just reminding you of that characterization. Second, it also helps to like kind of like maintain some sort of like autonomy and control within society because OT told you a little bit about this, like, oh, how like your rights to your own emotions are going to be infringed. But here's like the actual mechanism to this. Because when you have someone else coming up to you and you're having a really good day and someone comes to you and tells you their whole sob story, my right to feel happy has been infringed on. My right to feel happy has completely evaporated. And even when they go away, it's going to take a long time for me to recover from that. Because especially as an empathetic, normal human being, that's going to stay in my mind. That's going to linger. That's going to be an experience that haunts me. Okay, now continuing onwards, they've also kind of like OO has talked about like this whole okay, CO has told us that we've been over exaggerating the benefits. But I think like firstly, like we want to remind you the characteristics of like extreme and like the average empathetic person is definitely going to feel whatever impact that we've told you today. But and then next on like OO has actually substantively responded to the benefit of emotional regulation beyond the denial of its existence. So you already went proving that it's true. The only actual case is why exactly that going out in public is going to be actually harmful because of one, emotional trauma from reporting like your emotions or lack of support. There's something that CG also brought up. CEO also brought up. I'm going to like lump them together. I think that insofar as people have some sort of like emotional trauma from reporting their like lack of emotion, this is like completely negated by the fact that they can go to someone else. Secondly, their second harm on how like there's going to be a practical disadvantage at the workplace. I don't think that everyone with a functioning mind is going to take note of this context before judging this person. And like thirdly, the whole idea of insults and lasting emotional trauma is also negated by the fact that when you break down in a public place, let's say a mall, there's going to be no lasting impact. And if you break down in a public place in front of your coworkers and your friends, they're going to have a pre-established understanding of you. And the chance to grow by relating to others is completely taken down by this whole idea of emotional taxation. And so for all these reasons, we win on every front. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech, and I'll invite the op whip. Here.
Can I check to see if I'm audible?
Yep, audible and visible.
Um, Before I start, I just want to shout out East Malaysia Open for hosting this tournament. I'm very grateful to be part of this opportunity to help the people in like East Malaysia, even coming from northern region of Malaysia also, we're still developing the debate scene there, and I hope that more initiatives like this can be done on also on our side on the region, and we hope that more people like you all will also continue participating. And another shout out to my partner Faris, because this is our first time teaming up together. He's currently having a blackout issue also. Um, like I almost ended up having to resort to the teammate finder, but I'm really glad having to partner up with him, and I wouldn't want this novice finals to end up any other way. So thank you so much for giving me that window. I prefer POIs in the chat, preferably from opening. Where is it? Okay. Hmm. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it was only Faris that correctly points out that the the most vulnerable people in society are often like these mentally unstable people who don't have the support systems that both government benches claim that they have. They are often swept under the system because governments don't even fund like mental health care programs, because it's because of the stigmatization that government whip claims already exist in status quo. Those are why all the harms, like the increased rates of suicide, the increased rates of like mental health disorders are all on the rise. It's that specific stigmatization that is existing in status quo that CG claims is why we're having all these problems in the first place, right? We think that in a world where that stigmatization is like removed, or that people don't stigmatize this, is where like these like mentally unstable people can get the help that they need, especially like with the lack of support systems that they so much deserve as being part of the state in the first place. The state has failed them. I don't see why government like wants to talk about, oh, you live in a society, you gotta conform, but like that particular society has failed them. Like being in a society that claims like as a species that we're empathetic beings that try to understand each other. Like why is it that we are unable to understand when someone's like grandmother dies, or when like you break up with your partner, or you found out your partner's cheating on you, and all these like very horrible things that's happening, right? I think this is how we're going to resolve the things on CO side. Two clashes. Number one, is it actually like does is it harmful to bottle up your feelings? Because I think and like like hold it in like while you're trying to express it to your friends, because that's the alternative that government bench is claiming. And second, and I think this is the biggest like push coming from both benches, especially coming from CG, which is the idea of like disruption. Like is this explosive reaction of like extreme emotions actually so disruptive to the general public that it's like actually ruining your entire day, and we need to start stigmatizing because it's like a rising issue, right? I think if we solve these two clashes on CO side, I think we should be taking this debate. Before I start though, I'll take one from OG.
Yeah. So if you see a homeless person on the street, yeah, you feel bad and it affects you emotionally. But does that actually mean that you're going to give them money?
I don't know about you, but I would give them money. I don't know, like, bro, I'm not gonna lie. If you have money and you don't want to give it to them, it's kind of that's yikes, man. But anyhow, moving on. So, first clash here. Is it actually harmful to bottle up your feelings? Recognize that I think both government benches sat around the same thing, which is to say that, well, on OG side, their claim was that, yeah, like it's okay to bottle up your feelings because like if you hold it in, you can internalize it better. This is coming from like the DPM, and I think CG like framed it a bit more differently in terms of to say that like if you process your emotions first, then it's easier for you to vent out to your friends and family, right? I think the missing link coming from like both of these lines of analysis is that both teams were unable to prove how stigmatizing these extreme emotions, or like these public displays of emotions, directly correlates to you wanting to vent out to your families. I think Faris correctly points out that for like the vulnerable people, these mentally unstable people, they don't have the support systems. And second, even if you do have support systems, the issue right now is that these extreme emotions are not like premeditated. You just found out that this thing happened, or this particular situation just happened to that happened to you. It is a reaction. It is a reaction, and it's an explosive reaction, but it's really, really difficult to control. And like because like I think like we can just do a simple weighing, right? And like the worst case on government side, where like people like more people start like publicly like outbursts, start crying out in public, it's just like you feeling mildly annoyed, as what member of opposition said. You will probably think about it for like 10 minutes, like, oh my god, that guy's like weird, like lol, and then just move on about your day. And I don't understand this like whip's response in saying that, yeah, strangers are going to take you into cults. Like I don't think that's part of the debate, or I don't think that that's something that's like like even when that stigmatization happens, that's gonna happen anyway. Like I don't think that's how cults work. But moving on to that, like the whole point is that specific small time window where it's really critical for any human being. The worst case on opposition is that this mentally unstable person, unable to control that emotion in that small time window, will exert really like very harmful things onto themselves. That's like things like suicide, self-harm, like very erratic actions, because like emotions are like overriding like your mental health and your brain. And we've seen like recorded evidence of this like over the past, right? I think this sort of like visualization comes better from CO as opposed to what OO tells you, like as like sort of like principal need to express. And I think like this summarizes the clash on is it harmful to bottle up, right? Now the second clash, and I think this solves the idea of disruption. Um, I think OG completely loses this because they never mechanize how that stigmatization looks like. At least on CG's side, they tell you they give some levels of like principles as like, yeah, it's not good to disrupt even if it's annoying, like annoyance, because it's not my moral responsibility to be annoying, and it's not good to do so anyway, right? And I think CO correctly points out that being annoyed isn't the same as being mentally disrupted. I think mentally disrupted is up to a critical point where it ruins your day or it ruins your appetite. Like you straight up spent like your entire day just thinking about that crazy lady who was shouting out in the street and everything, right? I think more likely what's gonna happen is that you're just gonna forget about it in like a few minutes. I don't think that's disruptive, and I don't think that that is like that critical point wasn't properly sufficiently explained by CG specifically in to justify that we need to start stigmatizing, right? What has CO brought to you at the end of the day? Recognize that CO protects the most vulnerable people, which is the mentally unstable people, because we think that these people are the ones who are most deserving. Like in a world where stigmatization will continue, then there's no push for all of these like new like mental health systems or ways to deal with this, like to like speak out on all of these issues. And I think that's like the only, like we show you like how stigmatization causes all of this propagating of these problems. And I think it was only on our side we tell you that these people are completely invisible, and it's time we start letting people cry out in the streets. Proud to end this debate.
I thank the speaker for that speech and everybody for the debate. You guys can now virtually cross